Hello everybody, Maven here, and welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Now, we all know that Solar Titan is the most broken character in the game right now in Season 17. Everybody's walking around with throwing hammers all the way up to Grandmaster level content, and they're invincible, they cannot be killed, and they're wrecking champions with throwing hammers like they're nothing. So you might be thinking, what is even the point of Hammer Strike existing anymore when throwing hammers are so broken? Well, let me tell you, outside of Grandmaster level content, you might want to consider switching to Hammer Strike. And in this video, I'm going to show you why. As usual, before we talk about the build, I'm going to show a little clip of gameplay so you can see for yourself. So we're going to start things off with Hammer Strike, and we are in the Conflux Lost Sector on Nessus, and we're going to bot Carl and all of the ads around him, and you can see how it does. So note that all of these barricades that I'm placing are proccing classy restoration, and then the healing nade on top of that makes it so we're just basically immortal. And next up, we're doing the same thing, but with throwing hammers. So you be the judge, let me know in the comments down below which one looked like it did better to you. So things to point out about the Hammer Strike is that the burst damage on the Major was much greater, and it has better group ad control. If there's a bunch of ads that are clumped together, obviously one knee will ignite them all. And if you're doing an ad heavy activity, I would say that the Hammer Strike gives you more survivability because you're constantly proccing classy restoration with those barricades and throwing those healing grenades. And now we're going to do the same side-by-side comparison again in Shirochi, and while we do that, I'm going to talk about the throwing hammers. So the throwing hammers have a really high ease of use, they got better sustained DPS, and they don't require any setup like the knee charge does. However, one of the big problems with the throwing hammers when you're just running through some kind of activity and you try to throw a hammer at an ad, sometimes they will dodge or you will miss, and you're going to throw your hammer off a cliff, off the world, or all the way across the room, and you're gonna lose it. You're gonna have to run over there and find it and slide it and pick it up to continue doing what you were doing. So it's a little bit problematic when that happens, and that is one of the reasons why it took a lot more tries to get the clips in this video for the throwing hammers, is because sometimes you just miss your hammer. It happens, and that is where your restoration suffers. See, with the shoulder charge, you're not really gonna whiff that often, and if you happen to whiff, you still got your charge. You can just run and knee another guy. So it's really hard to mess up with the knee charge build. But with the throwing hammers, if you miss your hammer, and if you're using Heart of Inmost Light like this build today is, and your other abilities are not empowered and not charged at the moment, they will recharge at a normal pace, and you're eventually going to lose restoration, and you're just going to have to hide or hope you don't die. So that's a problem that could happen when you miss your throwing hammer. But definitely use throwing hammers for high-end content like Grandmasters, because there's some very tanky orange bar and yellow bar enemies and champions and whatnot, which you can't go spamming a knee charge at, but those throwing hammers you can constantly spam. Like I said a second ago, it has better sustained DPS and better for taking out those tankier enemies, despite the fact that the knee charge has better burst damage. So as for the build itself, this is basically going to be a copy paste of the Aphidia Spaith Infinite Throwing Knives Hunter build that I did a month ago. If you missed that video and you want to check it out, I'll link it in the card in the top right corner of the screen now. So this is basically that same build, just converted over to Titan. And like I said a second ago, we are using the Heart of Inmost Light exotic chest piece because this thing is the most insane ability spam exotic in the game. That is how you saw in the clips I was able to use my abilities back to back to back non-stop. And when you use one of your abilities, it's going to empower the other two abilities. When you use it again, they'll get a ×2 buff. And it says that melee and grenades will do more damage based on the amount of buffs they got. So when we throw out our barricade followed by our healing nade after each kill, that's going to give our melee a ×2 empowered buff, giving it extra damage. And on top of the damage we are getting from Roaring Flames ×3, because when we get a solar ability kill, it's going to give us stacks of Roaring Flames, making our solar abilities do more damage. So ×3 Roaring Flames with ×2 empowered from the Heart of Inmost Light makes our knee charges really strong. So with this build, you want to aim for 100 resilience, 100 discipline, and 100 strength, because those are what dictate the cooldown of our abilities that we are trying to spam. Now at tier 10 strength, we have a 35-second melee cooldown. You might think that that is a little bit too long to be able to spam your knee charge, and you'd be right. So we have to use a little bit of things to help it out. First things first, we have double outreach on our class item. So when we use our barricade, we're going to get a little bump in melee energy. And then this here is the big one, Bountiful Wells. Elemental well mods that create a well are going to now stack for each additional copy. So we have 2 copies of Melee Well Maker, and they don't stack to make you 2 wells. For some reason, they multiply to make you 3 elemental wells when you get a hammer strike kill. And then when you grab all 3 of those wells, it's going to bump up not only your melee, but all 3 of your abilities are going to get a bunch of energy back. And that's what's going to allow you to instantly recharge your barricade, so that when you put down your barricade, it procs outreach, and just like that, you have your melee charge back. But it actually doesn't end there. We still have one more way to generate melee energy, and that is going to be through double harmonic siphon on our helmet. So when we get double kills with solar weapons, that's going to generate an orb of power. And when we pick up this orb of power, that's going to trigger double invigoration on our boots. So when we pick up the orb of power, that's going to act sort of just like double outreach. That's going to give us chunks of melee energy back when we pick up an orb. And we have one more elemental well mod on our boots here, and that is Font of Might. So picking up a solar elemental well is going to boost our solar weapon damage by 25% for 11 seconds. And the good thing is that that actually stacks with Radiant, and that is going to multiply to be a 50% damage buff. And that is the reason why our heavy of choice with this build is going to be the Parasite, because with that Worm's Hunger ×20 buff, with a 50% damage buff on top of that, it absolutely nukes everything. Now, my primary weapon of choice with this build is going to be the Punching Out Sidearm with Subsistence and Swashbuckler. Now, I highly recommend going with any solar primary that has Swashbuckler. The Drain works just fine. Now, the thing about Swash and solar is that when you get a hammer strike kill, and it's going to pick up that well immediately because it generated right where you need charged, that's going to proc Radiant from the Ember of Torches, and also going to proc the Font of Might from picking up the well, and instantly proc Swashbuckler ×5, which is another 33% damage buff. And this thing's DPS, when all you have to do is get a hammer strike kill, the DPS on this thing turns insane. Like, I've tried other weapons, I've tried exotic solar weapons, they do not hit nearly as hard as the Punching Out. I tried the Vex Mythoclast, for example, and I'll show a little example on screen. I'm going to proc all those buffs and proc the Vex perk, get a kill, and this is the damage we're hitting for. Now, when I get a knee charge and proc Swash and all these buffs with the Punching Out, this is what I'm hitting for. And the Punching Out is a 450 RPM. The Vex is a 360 RPM. So the Punching Out's DPS is way higher. That is why this is my primary choice with this build. However, if you were in a situation where you needed some range, you could swap out the Parasite for the Ascendancy, and that would allow you to go with Vex Mythoclast, so you have a range primary. And the Ascendancy is pretty good with this build too, because it has Explosive Light. When you pick up orbs, that's going to increase this thing's damage. And obviously we're making a ton of orbs with double harmonic siphon on our helmet. And finally, this is the most important part of the build, a kinetic shotgun with 1-2 punch. Now, the Wastelander works just fine if you don't have an Astral Horizon. However, I think the Rangel D can also get 1-2 punch with auto-loading holster, correct me if I'm wrong. But auto-loading holster is really nice to have on here because it takes forever to reload shotguns. So the 3 times melee damage buff from 1-2 punch on top of the times 3 damage buff from Roaring Flames and the times 2 empowered from Heart of Inmost Light makes your Hammer Strike do really heavy burst damage. That's how we were able to obliterate Carl, and it's really good for majors and bosses. So I highly recommend getting 1-2 punch into this build somehow. And now one of the big downsides of this build is that you're going to need to farm some master dungeon content because you're going to need some artifice armor because we need to be rocking double outreach on our class item because it's basically required to make this build work. But we also cannot pass up on classy restoration because it's just that good. We all know how broken it is, but for those who don't know about it, who are new or returning to the game, this is how we're able to stay immortal. It still works without it. It can still work in future seasons, but yeah, it gives us restoration, and we're extending that restoration endlessly with Ember of Empyrean. So when we get Solar Weapon or Hammer Strike Final Blows, that's going to refresh our restoration and the radiant we're getting from our Ember of Torches, and the duration of them is massively increased because of Ember of Solace. And for our final fragment, we are running Ember of Eruption, so our solar ignitions that we get from killing enemies with the Hammer Strike are going to have increased area of effect for better ad clear. And then also that plus 10 strength added on there is really nice to help meet those triple 100s. And for our final aspect, we are running Soul Invictus, so when we get those knee charge final blows, we are creating sunspots, and that really helps for healing and also dealing extra damage to majors. And of course, not to mention the healing nade. So this build is extremely potent and very hard to die with. Like, I did solo Duality dungeon with this build and ads were just hammering me from every angle, yet I just could not die. I just had constant healing and they could not kill me. The only thing that could really kill me is a glitch, getting bungeed, getting booped off the world. That's basically the only way you can die. And another great thing about this build is that Hammer Strike is just good movement. If you're just running through a jumping puzzle or just anywhere in general, having that Hammer Strike to give you that knee charge boost forward for an extra boost of speed and distance makes getting around a lot better. So I guess that's all there really is to say about this build. As usual, if you have any ideas of what could contribute to this build and possibly make it better, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And for the rest of the video, I was thinking about showing the whole solo Keitel encounter with this build, but that'd probably make the video way too long, so I'll only show the ending of it while I do my outro here. So thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, be sure to hit that like button and leave a comment. Those two actions really help the algorithm and the video's performance. And if you are new and you like Destiny 2 PvE and PvP weapon testing and build crafting, then you come to the right place because we do that a lot here, so consider subscribing. Feel free to leave your feedback and suggestions, and I will catch you on the next video. Peace out.